visualize. So sit close to.
With my card now.
You recording?
Yeah.
Okay. It's gonna be posted anywhere or?
That's up to him. Are you posting this anywhere?
Probably YouTube if that's okay.
Okay. Should be fine. All right. I guess before we begin, who here actually has bought a deck from me before? All right. One person. Who here does tarot reading? All right. Who here is new to tarot and want to find out what tarot is all about? All right, sounds good. So this is reading Tarot the Pony Way. So, welcome.
Looking to see if the microphone is left in here.
No, there is not.
I think so. That's on the floor. Scoot over your way so I have it so I can.
You guys here for the tarot
a
panel?
little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're good.
To randomly take a card.
Just one or oops. Oh. Sweet.
Okay.
Oops, sorry.
So you can sit somewhere so you can see the screen because the projector doesn't seem to be working. So.
Oh no,
just
okay.
plow
Let's take the
around
back.
screen. Okay. So this is actually the first time I'm going to be doing a tarot panel at PonyCon. What's interesting is for the last 5 years, I've been most people know me for my pony tarot decks at pony conventions. I've been creating and selling different decks. But this is actually the first time I've ever done a panel specifically on the tarot. And it's mostly because people have been asking me, like, what symbolism do I draw from when I make my deck, and how do you read tarot? So I thought, okay, I'll give my little synopsis of what I know about tarot. So a little background about myself. I was actually raised in a Taoist family, so I'm a Taoist equivalent to a bishop before I kind of drifted away from the Taoist faith. But I grew up in an atmosphere that made use of a lot of symbolism and a lot of divination. When I found tarot, I actually found it not through, most people find it through fortune tellers and stuff. I actually found it through Alan Moore, the comic book writer Alan Moore. He wrote a fantastic book called Promethea, which made use as tarot as a structure, not as a structure for divination, but as a structure for looking at how things kind of coalesce throughout time. So, one panel I actually did where I did integrate a little bit tarot was a panel that's become kind of popular in the pony fandom. I retired it at BronyCon last year. It's called 100 Years of Narrative Art, where I look at a period of 100 years from the publication of Peter Pan in 1911 to the release of My Little Pony in 2010, and I looked at each era as if it was one card in the major arcana. And when you look at the major arcana in order, you find that it actually fits certain structures throughout time. There are theories of, history always repeating itself. You see history go through different chronological phases. And if you look at the tarot in a similar method, you can actually see little traces of symbolism as things progress. So when most people think about tarot, so let's start by talking about the history of tarot and a little bit of misconceptions about tarot. When we think about tarot, people think tarot is an ancient art form. It's actually, the modern tarot that we know is actually relatively recent. In fact, the modern tarot is just over a century old. Because when we think of tarot, the one deck most people think of, and the one deck that has been replicated over and over again, is a deck created by this fantastic artist, Pamela Coleman Smith. She created a deck that's known as the Rider-Waite deck. Now, if you don't know too much about tarot, tarot wasn't actually even used for divination and fortune telling. When we think of tarot now, we think of people with crystal balls reading the tarot cards, but that's not really how it started. Tarot cards were actually more of just a card game. You have the Italians create their own decks where they would have trump and pip cards. And in fact, we'll see that the modern day poker deck expounds from the major arcana, which mostly uses pip cards. So how did the divination part get brought into it? Well, there was a society back in Europe. In fact, there were many societies. These were groups that tried to look at more esoteric knowledge from the past. And the most famous of these groups were the Hermetics, or people who believed in an ancient connection between the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. And they used them, both the gods represent knowledge in their respective cultures, and the Hermetics, which you could also connect Freemasons, all these groups, but there are a lot of esoteric groups. The Kabbalah was one, I guess, work that was studied heavily by the Hermetic groups. This is also expounds from the alchemists, because back before the scientific revolution, alchemists were considered the scientists of that age. And when reason and experimentation and hypothesis became the default state for how we progress knowledge scientifically, you would have another group that would look at it through a more esoteric lens. Now, around the turn of the 19th century, we would have the group known as the Order of the Golden Dawn, which was based in Great Britain, that would try to connect the Italian tarot and the German tarot back to symbolism in ancient Egypt. Now, however, that's a story that they say tarot actually extends from ancient Egyptian cards, not Yu-Gi-Oh cards, though they try to connect it. But we would already know that this is false, because the Egyptians, the only paper they had were papyri. They had no cardstock. In fact, the first cards were invented in ancient China. And this was around the Renaissance period. So tarot cards cannot be as ancient as we think of them as. So where do all these symbolisms come from? So this deck is a default deck for most people when they look at it. There are some little things that were changed around. So for example, when I get to the cards later, the Justice and Strength cards were switched because they were trying to make their deck more connected to the zodiac, so they had to switch it so Libra and Lyre fit perfectly. Now, there is another deck that makes up a majority of the modern decks that people create, and this is known as a Thoth deck. Yes. Aleister Crowley. Now, who here knows about Aleister Crowley to begin with?
I know the name.
He is known, he's actually more influential in pop culture than most people realize. So Aleister Crowley was known as the Beast. He called himself the Great Beast 666. Our modern interpretation of Satanism actually comes from Aleister Crowley. So whenever you think of Hollywood movies where they have people in black robes around pentacles chanting and all that stuff, that comes from stuff Aleister Crowley started. Yeah. So, and it's funny, he didn't even believe in that. For him, it was just, you know, he was raised in a very, very religious family, just wanted to break away from that. So Aleister Crowley created his own version of tarot. He tried to go back to the traditional tarot before the Hermetic Golden Dawn tried to create their version. What's interesting about Aleister Crowley is he actually is the inspiration for a lot of fictional, I guess, wizards and Satanists. For example, The Exorcist, the priest in The Exorcist and Rosemary Baby was based off Aleister Crowley. Even up to Harry Potter, you have a character named Crowley in the new Harry Potter series, and actually Voldemort is based off when Crowley went bald. So the Beatles, Rolling Stones, a lot of different groups and works were heavily inspired by Aleister Crowley. And unlike the previous artist, Pamela Coleman-Smith, she got no recognition for creating the deck. Like, I'm a commissioned artist, so I feel for her. She was commissioned to create the tarot deck from the Golden Dawn, and she didn't get any revenue after creating it. I don't think she got paid, and she never got credit. It's only recently people have been trying to put her name back on the deck. That's why you'll hear the deck often referred to as the Rider-Waite-Smith deck.
So the deck was stacked against her.
Stop! This is a no way.
We're even now.
What are you doing now?
You said
Okay, fine.
You said you're even now.
At one of Alice Crowley's books, because I've got one of his modern art,
Yeah.
is about this high, this wide, and goes into very deep detail and is pure gold.
Yes. So Aleister Crowley, on the other hand, he actually respected the female artist who was working for him. Lady Frida Hirst was the artist who actually painted the Thoth deck, and he actually made sure she got credit for that. So we're going to talk about this because the Pony deck is actually based off these two decks a bit. Now, the last person I really, really want to talk about is Alan Moore. You might know Alan Moore as the infamous writer, comic book writer. A lot of his stories have become very, very big, monumental, influential works in culture, including Watchmen, V for Vendetta, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and Lost Girls. Alan Moore is also heavily inspired by the tarot, specifically the tarot as conceived by Aleister Crowley. Alan Moore wrote a series of of comic book stories in the 90s for ABC Comics, America's Best Comics. And one character he created was a strong female superhero called Promethea. Promethea was supposed to be a realistic take on Wonder Woman, but ended up becoming basically his magnum opus, portraying his ideas of what magic and art are. And one fantastic issue, so if anyone wants to get into learning about tarot, I'm not going to recommend any of those big books you see in Barnes & Nobles because those are just hashed together to make money. The one thing I'll recommend you pick up though is issue 12 of Promethea. And it's a fantastic issue because the comic book format, comic books are normally 22 pages an issue. What he does is he takes those 22 pages and connects them to the 22 trump cards of the major arcana. And he represents each trump card as an age within human civilization or the universe. So for example, the Fool will represent the beginning, before nothing. Then you'll have the Magician, which represents the Big Bang, and they'll go forward from there. I'm going to talk about that symbolism as I talk about my cards. But if you do want one work to look at, check out Promethea issue 12. So let's start with my deck. How did I choose the symbolism? If you don't know the history of the deck that I made, it took me about 2 years to actually do this because each of these cards were painted on a 11 by 17 canvas, oil paints, and if you guys know oil paints, it takes a long time to dry.
At least 3 weeks.
Yes. So this took me a long time to get done, but there is an interesting story for how I created a lot of these things. This right here is the Fool card. And the Fool is also known as the Fool that starts the journey. And what's interesting about the Fool card is people think, oh, Fool, Jester, Joker, that's not the original intention. When they talk about Fool, the original card has a Fool stepping off, starting a journey. It's known as the Fool's Journey. That's what the major arcana is supposed to symbolize and represent. Now, this is my journey into the MOP fandom because when I first joined the MOP fandom back in 2012, the very first piece of fan art I made was this Derpy card. So Derpy was the first card I made. That was the start of my journey. Now, Derpy I chose for a very important reason. Now, most people come up to my booth and say, why'd you choose Derpy as the Fool? She's not derpy, she's not like that, she's not foolish. I didn't choose her because of the foolish connotation. I chose her because she was the start of the journey. This Brony fandom would not have been started if it wasn't for one image of Derpy posted on 4chan right after the first episode aired. It was that one image of Derpy that basically sparked all the stuff that we have here. So she literally represents the start of not just my journey creating this tarot deck or my journey in the fandom, but all of our collective journeys in this fandom started this one card. So this is why I chose Derpy, and I thought it was a very, very important card. And actually, if you look, it's a very old piece of art because it's my first one, and I've often thought about going back and redoing this piece, but I thought, no, it's more important to keep her this way because this was the first piece of fan art I did for this fandom. So let's move to the #1 card in the deck, known as the Magician. Now, if we look, I would actually divide the tarot deck myself up into 2 periods. So when you look at the major arcana, from 0 to 10, I will say represent the history of the universe. So from the Big Bang to the creation of humanity, and from the strength to the world, I would say divides up periods of human civilization. So let's talk about that in context of the Fool. So, I am a scientist. I studied genetics and biology at Johns Hopkins University. And what does science know about the beginning of the universe? Well, in the beginning, there was nothing. There was no time, there was no matter, there was nothing. All that has been was always there and will ever exist. Condensed into one tiny point and became the Big Bang. So from nothing, the Fool, we have one, the spark. The spark that started everything, the spark of creation, the Big Bang. When you read Genesis in the Bible, you'll see that at the beginning there was nothing. There was God. God was always there. He was always eternal. He always existed. God then said, let there be light. And there was. In Taoism, which I was raised, again, there was nothing. There was just the Tao at the beginning. The Tao was nothing. It was empty. It was just existing. Then the Tao became, and everything flooded into existence. And what happened when the Tao became? It divided into two, yin and yang. When God said, "Let there be light," he divided the world into light and darkness. When the Big Bang exploded, all matter became matter and antimatter. So from nothing, we get the one that becomes the two. So we already have the first steps of creation within the universe and the first steps within this tarot deck. So the magician represents that spark of creativity, that one tiny speck that starts the journey. You have the journey started, but this is the inspiration that will push it forward. This is the speck of imagination. That's why if you look at most traditional tarot decks, you're going to see the magician with the infinity symbol on top of the magician, which represents infinite potential. You're also going to see a cup, a sword, a coin, and a wand, representing the four suits of the major arcana. When we go to the second card, the High Priestess, we're going to see a division. And this is going to represent the yin and yang. So there are going to be many different interpretations of what the High Priestess means in tarot. The original name for the High Priestess was actually the Popess. They actually had her as a female pope, but of course since that was blasphemous, it was changed to the High Priestess. The High Priestess sits between two columns. You have a black column and a white column. You're divided between two worlds, a material world and an abstract world, or a realm of art and a realm of science. You're going to also be divided between two realms, and you have to choose whether, in your interpretation, this means you have to balance dualities or you have to separate the dualities. So right here I have Twilight Sparkle. Twilight Sparkle is a very, very interesting conundrum because not only is she the element of magic and lives in a world with magical talking ponies and all that stuff, she also is the most scientifically minded pony. And I would guess that she would love to know more about the laws of the universe and laws of physics as opposed to magic. You see her, she's very intuitive. She's caught between two worlds. She is a conundrum in of herself because she represents literal magic. She represents friendship, which is an abstract concept. Yet, for her, only organization, reason, and facts are the ways that the world works. So let's move to the third card. We have the Big Bang, we have the yin and yang, and now we have the third card. Now the third card is known as the Empress, and the third card is known as the card of creation or the card of birth. So what happened after the Big Bang created matter and antimatter? What happened after God created light and dark? What happened after Tao created yin and yang? Those two elements came together and created everything else in the universe. It became the birth of everything. All matter, all life, all came from this one spark. So we're going to have the Empress card, 3 representing birth and creation. Now, I chose Celestia, and it's very, very important because if you look at Celestia, she is made up of the 3 pony races. You have the Earth Pony, the Unicorn, and the Pegasus. And if you think about the creation of Equestria in the show itself, it was when the 3 races united with each other to form Equestria that everything really got started. So I chose Celestia because she represents that. She represents the foundation. She represents the birth. She's the Empress. She's the one that represents the 3 races and is the birth of all creation within this universe. Now let's move to the 4th card. Now the 4th card is very, very interesting. So the 4th card is known as the Emperor, but I put Lauren Faust, a human, the only human in this deck, as the Emperor. Now why did I choose her as Emperor? Well, let's look at the symbolism of 4. What does 4 represent in Western culture normally? 4 represents the 4 elements. You think about earth, air, fire, and water, the 4 classical elements that make up all of Greek mythology. Well, let's look at 4 from another perspective in architecture. 4 represents the 4 corners of the house. Every single foundation needs 4 corners, so 4 corners are foundation. Well, let's look at it from another point. So I'm a geneticist. What do I know? When I study DNA, I know that there are 4 base pairs. There are only 4 base pairs that could combine and create different things. And when you look, 4 is the foundation. 4 are the building blocks. 4 is the element. Almost every single culture, you're going to see 4 represent something that are the building pieces to build upon. You have Lauren Faust, and she is the fourth. She unites the Pegasus, Earth Ponies, Unicorns, and Alicorns together. She took MOP from Gen 3 to Gen 4. Gen 4 is her foundation 4. So we have 4 represented many times within this one card, with Lauren Faust as the Emperor because she is the foundation for which not just this fandom, but the current MOP franchise is built on. Now, let's move to the 5th card. The 5th card is a very interesting card because the 5th card is known as the Hierophant. Most cards that will portray the Hierophant will portray him as the Pope. This was, remember when I said the original High Priestess was supposed to be the Popist card? Well, this was supposed to be the counterpoint to the female Pope. It was supposed to be the male Pope. Now, most would just put the Pope there, but that was not the original meaning of the Hierophant. The Hierophant was originally known as a teacher. It was a card that represented looking for knowledge, seeking knowledge, and educating someone in knowledge. So there's no better pony to represent being a teacher than Cherry Lee. So Cherry Lee is going to be the Hierophant in this card, and if you guys do have my deck and you do look at the chalkboard, I put a lot of little symbolisms that which may be fun. Is that TJ? Don't worry, he's just crazy. Who's that? Okay, so let's move forward to 6 before. Stop it. Okay, let's look at the 6th card. We have the Lovers. Now, the Lovers is a very, very interesting card. So if we looked at the universe, so let's say, again, Big Bang, all the way to this point, we have the Lovers. What happens when you now have the base pairs, the DNA, the elements to make up everything? You need to somehow be able to reproduce. So as a biologist, what we define as a living organism, it has to be able to mutate, it has to be able to die, but most importantly, it has to be able to reproduce. Viruses are not living organisms by definition because they cannot reproduce on their own. So the 6th card represents that, the reproduction of elements. You take the elements from 4, you take the knowledge from 5, you have these codes, but you have to be able to ensure that life will continue generation to generation down the line. So we have the Lovers, which represent that, the union, the pairs that will push things forward. We move forward to the 7th card. We have the Chariot. The Chariot card represents going out there, trying to seek adventure, trying to seek journey. Unlike the Fool at the beginning, which represents the Fool's journey, this one represents 2 other types of journey. It represents a temporary journey where you have to initiate a journey to go on, or the blind journey where you go on a journey not really understanding where or what you want to go and do. And of course, I have it represented by the CMC, who are always trying to go out and find their cutie marks, I guess, until the recent season, which I haven't seen yet, but I've seen their cutie marks. It looks interesting. So let's go to this card. Now, this is where it will get a little confusing. If you're used to the Rider-Waite deck, you're going to notice that this card should actually be the Strength card, but I have it as Justice because, like I said, the Rider-Waite deck switched these 2 cards to make it more in line with the Zodiac. However, I like the original meaning better. So for the 8th card, I have the Justice. Now, Justice, again, if you look at 8, 8 does have the same meaning as Infinity, infinite potential. Justice represents virtues, understanding the virtues and trying to go out there. As a Taoist, 8 is very important because you have the 8 hexagons of the I Ching. These are the different phases from which the universe flows and ebbs. Even modern religions use 8 as something that's very, very important. So Christianity, the number 8 is very important because, on the 7th day God rested, but then the 8th day starts the new week. Even Scientology believes in something called the 8 dynamics. I think aliens at dinner at that point. Okay, so let's get to the 9th card. The 9th card is the Hermit. Now, the Hermit in most tarot is represented by normally a wizard or a wise man or shaman being closed up in a cabin in the woods somewhere, focusing on their art, focusing on their craft. That is what the shaman normally means, and I think it's a good meaning because who's the most shamanic character in the show? We have Zecora. So Zecora represents the shaman and the Hermit pretty well, represents isolation. She does live deep in the Everfree Forest. She lives in chaos in an area that's not controlled by Celestia, but she still does fine, and she's fine living there because that is where she understands and partakes and perfects her crafts. So now we come to the last card of the first phase, I would say, and this is the Wheel of Fortune. The Wheel of Fortune has many different interpretations. Depending on which tarot deck you buy, you're going to have thousands of interpretations because it could represent luck, it could represent fate, it could represent finding your fortune, it could represent initiating that journey, it could represent initiating that spiral, It's all very timey-wimey, so that's why I thought, wouldn't it be perfect to represent the most confusing card that has the most meaning with a character who looks like the 10th Doctor. So the 10th card we have Dr. Hooves. And I think that's pretty accurate.
I think that's the most coolest portrayal of Dr. Hooves I've ever seen.
Yep, thank you. Yep, and if you can see in the background, I actually put some more symbolism for anyone who is interested in studying symbolism back there, so you can better understand the card. Now, so this is where Alan Moore will start to say that this is when the tarot deck starts representing phases of human civilization. So if we want to think of the previous as the classical ages, how man rose up from the primordial ooze, became caveman, and all of a sudden ascended to a golden age, the Greek golden age, Chinese golden age, Egyptian golden age, Mesopotamian golden age. We were at our height at this point. We spun the Wheel of Fortune. We were the organism that raced up to the top of the evolutionary tree. So now we have something called civilization, we have society, and we have culture. What happens when we don't treat our culture right? Civilization and society go down. Every time, if you look at the history of man, whenever we treat our arts, our stories, our imaginative thinking as just product, something lesser, you see society follow suit. But every time we treat our arts with respect, we have golden ages, we have renaissances, we have revivals. So this is an interesting card because it's going to have a lot of different meanings, which may or not represent the card I have here. But you have a card that's known as the Strength in the Rider-Waite deck. It's also called the Lust in the Thoth deck. Now let's look at Strength. Now this is a very good card for Rainbow Dash because she is one of the strongest ponies in the show, and she's kind of the strength of the team. She's also the strength of the franchise when you think about it. Most people identify the show with Rainbow Dash herself. She represents strength. While Lust, on the other hand, I would like to see as representing pride, ego, selfishness, which is something that Rainbow Dash does. Now let's look at human culture and civilization. When was the first major period that we kind of thought we were at the top and everything started going downhill from there? It was at the height of Rome. It was the fall of Rome would be represented by the Lust or the Strength card. In fact, that now adds an entirely different meaning to the card, which has a female with the infinite symbol on top of her trying to tame a lion. You could think of it as a gladiator fight. So we have so much infinite potential at that point in Roman culture, yet we decide just to let the masses look at all these bloodly, senseless fights. We have the first mass media, first mass entertainment, and that's when society starts going downhill. And this is when we have the first fall of Rome, the sacrifice. Now, that card has a more negative meaning, and I chose Pinkie Pie as a more positive representation. I'll explain why later. But the Hangman is also known as a traitor. He is someone that must be sacrificed in order to put things right, or he's someone that's out of place and not part of society, or should be removed from society. Now, why did I choose Pinkie Pie? Well, tarot decks, depending on who designs them, cards always have two meanings. Cards will, depending on if it's in face up or in reverse, the card's going to have dual meaning. So I decided to look at the Hangman from a more positive perspective because Pinkie Pie is someone who, she could break the fourth wall. She does not exist within the world. She is someone who, if you remove her from the show, would actually make the show more streamlined. But I think the fact that she is able to break the fourth wall, that she is able to make commentary, that she is able to tell Twilight, hey, you know, some things can't just be explained, makes her invaluable. She is the Hangman. She is the one who is out of place. She's the one who is the sacrifice, yet she belongs there because it makes things just work. So that's where we have Pinkie Pie as the hangman. So I won't say she's a traitor, but that's the interpreted meaning of the hangman card. So